In this discussion, we'll be focusing on the importance of teaching and engaging students around climate and sustainability in school settings, how schools can integrate it into their mission and everyday life, including how leaders and educators can get buy-in from all stakeholders of their school to prioritize sustainability and hold it as a key value of their school mission. We'll also discuss practical and actionable strategies that schools can put in place and implement if they're looking to reduce their impact on the environment around them. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by our guest today. It'd be great to do a quick introduction of everyone on the call. So Brett, do you want to go first with a quick intro of yourself?
Good evening to all the listeners. My name is Brett Gavin. I'm lucky enough to be the principal of the Arbor School here in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. I've been here at the school for 4 years now. It's been fantastic. I've been in the Middle East for more than a dozen years. You may not quite pick it out of my accent, but I am a Kiwi and a proud Kiwi, where I grew up on the beaches and the surf and the mountains, and found my way overseas and eventually here to the Middle East. So thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. Darcy, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely pick up the accent from Brett because I'm a wannabe Kiwi. Unfortunately, I was born and raised in Australia. But I work with EIM, Education in Motion. So I'm the group head of sustainability and global citizenship there. I've been with them for about 2.5 years. And previous to that, and still these days, I have my own organisation called Teaspoons of Change, looking at our personal choices and how that fits into the big picture of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So, yeah, fabulous to join in the conversation today.
Excellent. Thanks, Darcy. And Megan?
I'm Megan Kennedy-Woodard, and I don't hail from New Zealand. I'm an American living in Oxford. I am a founder of Climate Psychologists and the new online platform Mind and Planet, which trains teachers how to support children as they navigate the climate crisis. And we do this sort of to bridge the gap between climate awareness and climate action, as we really think the sort of well-being part is where the longevity, the resilience, and the ability to thrive in climate work exists. So we really want to help teachers engage students to feel excited about doing their part in the climate crisis and preparing them for the future as green leaders.
Fantastic. Great to all have you on the call. So yeah, just sort of going straight into my first question. Why is it important to make students aware of and teach climate and sustainability in an international school setting, or any school setting for that matter? Who'd like to kick that one off?
I'll just chime in quickly to already debunk the question. So I think one of the things that I've learned over many years is not to teach sustainability and global citizenship, is to infuse it into just the everyday life of a school and the life of a student. And yes, there are some of those moments where you do the front-on part of, what is sustainability, what are the global goals, how do we take actions, etc. But I find it's more of a saturation of small touching points that has a greater impact. Where does it show up in a music class, or on your outdoor excursion, or the drama play, those sorts of things. So yeah, I think it's essential for every school. There wouldn't be any school that doesn't want to do more in sustainability. But my personal approach, and one that I've seen that works really well, is a little bit more of that light touch, but more frequently, so that it just shows up in different places and builds a culture and a mindset around those sorts of things.
I think international schools are an interesting sort of it's just sort of an interesting cohort, because, for example, we work with a school in the Philippines, and you have some students that are from the Philippines that will be the future political ruling class. You have lots of influxes from people all over the world. And then you have local children who their parents are doing everything to get them into that school because they value education and they think it's the most important thing that they can give to their children. So you have this really interesting mix of different people coming in with different experiences, different life experiences and stories, and for them to be able to sort of integrate that part of who they are into an ethos that a school really supports emotionally in the actions they take. I think there's a real opportunity for international schools to have a big impact in changing the world.
Obviously, I agree with almost most of what's been said there. At my school, we take an approach called eco-literacy, which, although I agree with Darcy there, we're not trying to teach all about sustainability. We have to teach for sustainability, where the children live it as much as learn about it. We sort of subscribe to the idea that there are some ecological fundamentals that we need to understand. simple things. They like connecting with nature and systems, and the fact that energy flows within a system and it recycles, and there is no waste in nature. So some of those ideas can be simplistic and some of them can be really complex. But if we've got that foundation of knowledge of systems thinking and how ecosystems connect and thrive, then we can apply that to make sustainable human futures as well. So it's a little bit of educating about sustainability as much as education for and living for sustainability. So I think those two kind of go hand in hand. If you do one without the other, you'll get a sort of shallow version, in my experience.
And should, when it comes to integrating it into subjects in school, should teachers from all subjects be working climate and sustainability education into their subjects? Obviously, it's going to be harder for others, but is this something that you feel each teacher should sort of strive to do, and how might they do that?
The answer is yes. I think there's always an opportunity. I think you guys might agree with me on this, considering what we've all just said. But I think across the board in any sector that I've worked with, whether it's like entertainment or education, there's always a point where you can integrate some kind of conversation or some sort of theme into what you're teaching. And I think we need to dispel the myth that you have to be a geography teacher or a climate scientist to talk about climate change. Anybody can talk about climate change. In fact, talking about climate change is an action in and of itself. And so, I think, like Darcy said, in music classes, in art classes, in English classes, in civics classes. So I think it's important to really give teachers the confidence to teach what they love and what they know. So if a history teacher is passionate about exposing the problems with colonialism, well, that's an ecological problem as much as it is a historical a historical problem. So we can be integrating those stories in. If there's an English teacher, I mean, they're beautiful. Read Wordsworth. There's so many opportunities to bring that nature, a love of nature, but also sort of what we can do about it, and empowering the kids to look at it as a holistic picture, because that's really what the climate crisis is, but also how we can solve it.
Again, yes, yeah, absolutely, Megan. I agree. There's opportunities everywhere. My schools are through schools, so I think the key thing I always come back to is it's age-appropriate opportunities. We don't need everyone to be a geographer or a botanist. We're not trying to teach them biology. That's a subject. But what we are is looking for opportunities to connect children to nature, to have them understand how, my health is your health, and the environment's health is all of our health. So if we can understand that these things are connected, then we can start to care about it, and we can start taking the next step. So education for sustainability doesn't mean green stuff. I think that's a really shallow view of it. Citizenship, ability to take action, willingness to take action, actually taking action, all these things are more than just green stuff. So what Darcy does in terms of, he's been telling us about with global citizenship, is just as important as understanding how energy cycles through a system. So I'm not expecting my mathematicians to cheapen the teaching quadratics because they're trying to do it outside. Do it inside. Make great mathematicians, and take that mathematics and apply it to models of economics that will help to change our world. This is the way we can make a difference at age-appropriate levels of challenge within the discipline, as well as education for sustainability, willingness and ability to act.
Yeah, and following on from that, Brett, that's a lovely easy leverage point to take off from, is some of the strategy I think is about ensuring teachers feel a sense of confidence and competence around sustainability, because it is a big, hairy, scary thing to try and take on sometimes. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals, these gigantic things, where the hell do you start? So I think it's about trying to make it accessible, relatable, and relevant for any teacher or any person, really. And so for me, that's what I try and do, is just break it down to, well, what are some of the lenses that we can put on into our own daily lives that then just come out naturally in whatever course or subject or year level we might be teaching. And that lens can be pretty simple. Something like, what does this look like in a collective context of 8 billion people on one finite planet? And that could be your basketball class, and looking at the uniform you're wearing and thinking about where did it come from, who made it, what conditions were they in. Just throwing in a few provocations or some big picture thinking And then the reverse side of that lens that I like to offer to educators is, what does that mean to me as an individual and my personal choices, decisions, and actions? So I think it isn't any harder for a maths teacher or a geography teacher to do that. It's just trying to have some of those simple tools that don't seem too scary, but really enhance what teachers are already doing.
I think it's also sort of just dispelling the myth that it's this big scary, I think somebody, you said big scary hairy thing. And it's sort of like, there is no monster under the bed. There actually is, and we need to address it, and we need to talk to kids about it openly, and again, completely being age appropriate. We talk about younger children just fostering that love and guardianship over nature. We don't need to scare them. We want them to just cultivate that, but also actually allowing teachers to sit in the space of uncomfortableness with their students when they express anger, grief, rage, and whatever they're feeling, actually letting the teachers have permission to not try to make it better for them, but actually process with them, and then think about, it's important that you feel this. This is signaling these important values. You have stewardship over nature, love of species, compassion towards other people, equality, all of those things. How do we then take those important emotions and translate them into actions? And I think helping teachers to hold that space for themselves, but also with their students, is a really important tool that they can use.
And just sitting on that for a second, how would you, or how might you deal with a teacher or students that are feeling, overwhelmed or anxious, perhaps? Megan, I know you've done quite a bit of work on this. It'd be great to get your individual views on what kind of steps school leaders or even staff might take if they see their colleagues or the people that they're working with perhaps feeling anxiety or stress around it. It'd be great to learn some of your approaches.
Brett, your turn to kick off first, surely.
I can shoot first, sure. I think always proactivity is better here. So if we can get ahead of this with proactive measures to, I think exactly what Megan said, is help children realize that all emotions are okay. It's the strategies that we have to deal with that and take it from frustration or anxiety, whatever it is, to some kind of resolution. So we took a really proactive approach and said we can't separate the cognitive from the emotive. That would be silly. So we've brought into, inverted commas, brought into a program called Positive Education, which is a research-informed framework to help children understand their emotions and their character traits and then go forward with that. So assuming that we've done that, there's still going to be a little bit of ambulance at the bottom of the cliff when children come in and anxious and worried. And so we both train our own staff how to respond to that proactively. We have some specialists in our school, so we have some social emotional counselors who work a lot with that. And like you would if someone was struggling with mathematics, you send them to the specialist. It's not that there's a deficit model here. It is, this is the person who's got the exact set of skills that can help in it. So in a school, you put your resources and time and effort where you want to make a change. So we put our resources and time into having the right people and the right training. And as a school leader, I guess that's a decision for you to prioritize or not, depending on what you think is most important.
Yeah, and a slightly different angle from my way of having this conversation with either students who are very passionate about this, or some who are completely apathetic, or teachers as well. And when it comes down to the basic denominator, I say, well, doing something is better than nothing. And so we can't change the world by ourselves as one person, but also doing nothing, that's the only guarantee we have that things can't change. If we do something, I can't guarantee you that it's going to, I don't tell people, teaspoons of change, turn off the light and you'll save the world. It's about, well, your head and your heart is connecting to your hand, which is turning off that light switch. And that is significant. The fact that you are connecting your actions to their impact, that's really what we're talking about. And yes, we can't control things that are so huge, but again, what we can control are our own personal actions and behaviors and attitudes towards these things, and doing something is far better than doing nothing. So it's a slightly pessimistic maybe way of looking at things, but I think it can also be quite a proactive way, especially if you've got things like positive education, the work that Megan and other people are doing, and just that narrative really, I think, hits a chord with young people to feel like, okay, I don't hold all the cards in my hand, but here are a few things I know I can do, and that throwing it out into the world and seeing where it lands.
I mean, a couple of things that I think I completely agree with that. I think one thing is teachers have the opportunity to really give up the myth of perfection in this. And having to be, do everything right, because I think there's been the absolute disinformation campaigns that have perpetuated the myth of this being the responsibility of the individual. And it's really important that we foster that resilience and that self-efficacy in young children and older children and everyone really, that we all make a difference, because it's important that we all are those teaspoons of change. But I think with that said, there is sort of the propensity for the idea of like climate anxiety to climate action, and that resolves it. And to some degree, some climate action does sort of help with climate anxiety, but it can also be treated as a sort of buffer where people end up having to do more work because they're anxious, and then they're not doing enough, and they kind of get in this rat trap. And actually, what's literature is showing now and studies are showing now is actually climate anxiety is really helped by collective action. And so if you're a teacher in a school and children are coming to you talking about this, again, taking their individual emotions and normalizing them. Yes, your peers feel this way. I sometimes feel this way. That actually brings out that community connection, that collective response. That's okay to feel these big emotions, but what are we going to collectively do with these emotions? And I think that that's really helpful for teachers to kind of, bring everyone in.
Leading on to my next question, lovely there. Why is it taking buy-in from stakeholders across the school is vital to make any impact, right? So why is stakeholder buy-in so important when developing whole school strategies for sustainability, and perhaps some of the challenges you've each faced regarding getting this buy-in from stakeholders? Darcy, do you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, I can. I mean, the first thought that comes to my mind is, I've been lucky to be in this space for a long time, and once upon a time, you were the crazy person in the corner talking about these sorts of things, and who knows where it came from, but eventually and surely we're not the crazy people in the corner these days. Most people are somewhere around there, and so I think, in my work around sustainability and global citizenship has just become easier and easier every year in terms of engaging people. So I think there's just been a growing trend and way of people engaging with these topics and issues. So I think these days the buy-in is a lot easier. It's pretty hard to debate the idea of, well, probably we should be better people. That when I'm presenting to 5-year-olds, what is global citizenship and these big words and where do they fit into it? And it's like, well, what does it mean to be a good person? And we all know what that kind of means, and like Megan said, it's not that perfectionist. It's just like trying to make good choices when we can. But to go back to your question around stakeholder buy-in, I think for me it has to be a mix of sort of science and entertainment and coming back to that accessibility, so that most people, well, not so much these days, but certainly in the past, people think you're going to give them a moral bashing or a guilt trip or ask them for money when you start talking about some of these social justice and sustainability topics and issues. So I think making it accessible, using sport or music or popular culture to have conversations around these things, as well as some very strategic tools, maybe something like ESG, environment, social governance reporting, or relevant tools that can bring people around the table to have higher quality conversations on these topics. So I'll just sort of land it there, I think, and leave space for more conversation on that one. But yeah, stakeholder engagement is easier, but how we do it is always a multifaceted, bunch of ideas to throw out on the table.
I'll pick up then. So I think I 100% agree that no one has ever come to my school and said, "Oh, you do sustainability? No, thank you. We don't want that." That bit's an easy sell, right? When they come in and at my school, I'm very lucky with our facilities and there's some lovely things going on there. So that bit's an easy sell. I think the hard bit is authenticity. If you're going to take this up as an organisation or as a school leader, is you can't just say we're the Green School and we do Earth Hour, because it'll not wash. So stakeholder buy-in comes with authenticity. Myself and one of my team who does all our marketing, we always say that marketing is the propaganda of consumerism. We're not marketing to our families, we're telling authentic stories. And you can only tell authentic stories if you're authentic, because otherwise it just unravels. So The stakeholder buy-in comes from an authenticity of purpose. You live it, you breathe it. It's not an either-or conversation. We're not saying in schools you can have great maths or sustainability. These are both and conversations. And I think, like Darcy said, you tell the story. You tell it through art and drama and fun and laughs and commitment and expectations. And if everyone comes in expecting that, then they know it. And if they're in there and it doesn't wash with their values, then they go elsewhere. And that's okay, because we're building a community, and that community will grow if you stay authentic to that purpose.
Yeah, I would like to just touch back on what Darcy said at the beginning of just sort of, being kind of the pariah and being brave enough to be the pariah in the school. If your school isn't yet there with sustainability, if they prioritize other things, there's the sort of like 25% changes social mandates. And we can see this in things like suffragettes, civil rights movements. It doesn't have to be everybody in the community, but if you can get to that 25% tipping point, that's where you really start to pull in putting it into the sort of popular narrative. And that's where you can actually drive that buy-in if you have enough people getting going with it. So I would say, if you don't have buy-in from the top yet, don't give up, keep going. There's got to be the first person always. And if you're the one that instigates this and keeps it going and drives it, but in a way that's very positive, like, oh, my kids are loving how we're exploring this in music class. And, oh, they're getting so much out of our civics discussion here. Start to talk about all the positives. And that's where you're going to nudge your colleagues into that space of, oh, actually, we really need to be on top of this. This is the way this is going.
Yeah, Megan, that's a really good point about, stakeholder engagement, I think, more so than sort of stakeholder people. We've been through a phase somewhere, 5 or so years ago where everyone was trying to be the plastic police. Like, oh, you can't do that. Or if Darcy's walked in the room, I better make sure I'm doing everything sustainable. It's like, well, I'm not perfect. No one is, that's for sure. But I think that's shifting around that positive angle as well, which all four of us share around that. So I think that's a really good point.
And the early adopters, that adoption curve, like I say, you only need to get a third of the team on board and then you're away. But if we're thinking of percentages, and I think the interesting thing of this is an international schools network is, by and large, we're a privileged group because that's where our clientele come from. So that puts us sort of in the 1%. If you think of it, something like 1% of the planet uses 70% of the resources, and 1% of the planet produces 50% of the emissions, something like that, don't quote me. So we only actually have to change 1% of the population of the planet, which is us. Right? So everyone that's sitting in our schools is the people we have to change. So what a noble purpose. We only have to fix our bit. And if we can fix our bit, then we're in a far better position. The rest of it will take care of itself.
Mm.
Such a great point. And just looking at some of the actionable strategies that you've implemented in your school settings, that perhaps listeners to this can take away. What strategies have you used to get stakeholder buy-in from parents and the wider school community? Ones that have worked really well, and then maybe ones you've tried that didn't work perhaps so well. But it'd be great to touch on some of those. Darcy, you're nodding your head.
Sure. Yeah, I can go down my ESG wormhole now, if you like. Well, I mean, I won't. I'll cover it briefly. But, from Brett, what you were just saying then, I think something that I think about is this systemic acupuncture point. It's a term from Richard Hames and a few other wonderful thinkers. Where do we put our little needle of influence to have the impact that we can? And so a couple of tools that we've been using at EIM is ESG reporting, environment, social governance reporting, and also a carbon roadmap or carbon mapping. And so these are pretty business orientated, sciencey type things, but I think there's a lot of scope there for student engagement in particular. So how do we have some of this vocabulary so that we can be a part of the conversations happening in Davos, just around the corner from Switzerland, where I am actually at the moment? And how do we have that vocabulary so that we don't just buy into something like ESG, but our students can learn about this and transform it into something far better, far more authentic, far more positive, and impacting in the world. So I think something that we're trying to do is bring everyone onto a similar page where we, again, kind of can have these higher quality conversations. And some just simple questions that we ask for our community engagement from students and parents and suppliers and those sorts of things is, what's important to us, what are we doing well, and what more could and should we be doing in terms of, learning, planet, people, policy, those sorts of things. And I think if we can bring people around some high quality conversations, maybe produce a report. The report is almost insignificant. It really is about the process. But there are a couple of tools that I've tried to use in the last couple of years to, I think to some good effect. It takes a lot of time for people to get their head around some of these concepts, but as long as people are having conversations and coming back to them with some sense of accountability, I think that's something that I've tried to use in the last couple of years for sure.
I would say before it was climate psychologist, it was just psychologist. So I like this part, and without, I don't want to say insidious, so maybe we'll say stealthy. But I think it's looking at your audience and individual groups. So if a school is highly motivated by outcomes, talk about stats, talk about the level of anxiety that children are experiencing, talk about the impact that you as a school can have. If they're highly motivated by accolades, talk about how all the other schools are doing this, and it's actually, it looks really bad if you're not doing it. Nudge, talk about how much better their school will be, how more just sort of what better potential employees your group like what you could bring to sort of the upcoming markets in terms of their ability to get good jobs, especially in the green economy. So it's kind of finding your way into what the school values. And like we said at the beginning, there's always the opportunity to have the climate conversation. So just figure out what their, I guess, like the acupuncture pressure point is and find that and twist it and get in there.
Yeah, I like that, the acupuncture, the needle point, you said tipping point. So I think all complex adaptive systems, ecosystems have those points of emergence. So how do we predict them is a big question I've got. So maybe I need to speak to Darcy about that. But in terms of stakeholders, the easiest on-ramp for parents is their kids. So we're not indoctrinating, we're educating. So I would never, for example, maybe never is a strong word, but if I were to remove meat from our menu, for example, it wouldn't be about veganism, it would be the sustainable choice. Same as we wouldn't use that chemical, we wouldn't use this medical procedure because we know it's bad for person or planet. We're just not going to choose this thing because it's bad for people and planet. So trying to, doing what we do and hopefully doing it well is the children then become the vehicle to convince other people. That's a really good on-ramp. And also if you're trying to convince your local transport agencies or bus people or the rubbish collectors, students, particularly young children, are really good at convincing adults. It's hard to say no to kids. So that's a good trick. Put the kids up front. They don't want to listen to me. 2, try not to be too preachy. No one really likes being lectured to and preached to. So all the things that maybe not all the things, but a lot of the things we're trying to do is just build community. So all the things that your community already want, if you've got a group of a certain nationality, what can you offer them that brings them to sight? And then they just become a part of it. So build community around that purpose by leveraging the things that they already enjoy doing, whether it's mums and tots or barbecue on site or, an opportunity to learn the local language or their own native language. So leveraging the community that you already have and just trying to build it around your mission. And then you'll turn around, I think we do now, and realize that everyone's on board. Well, again, everyone's a strong word, but that's on-ramp. Now, the other thing I was going to say is when you're trying to make significant change, then providing multiple on-ramps that gives people a sort of choice, a level of difficulty, whether it's you pay for it, we'll pay for it, bill you, or here's another way to do it for free, but it takes a little bit of legwork. Any of those is fine, but you've just got to choose one. So that's probably the other way. And that takes a bit of work from our side, but it's a noble cause, so it's worth the effort.
Excellent. Well, we touched on how important it is to genuinely build it into the curriculum and ethos and mission for the school. So how can climate sustainability education be built genuinely into the school curriculum, ethos, and mission to inspire that students to take responsibility during their time at school and develop that sort of lifelong passion for sustainability? What are some of the techniques and strategies you've used to do that more widely?
I think Brett brought up an interesting point of sort of putting the kids to the front of it. There was a study that came out today, actually, of 37,000 children from 150 countries. And it was asking sort of what do they want, if they could form their education, what would they lead on? And 42% said that they would like to learn how to take better care of their mental health. And 44% they said that they wanted to learn how to tackle climate change and take better care of the planet. And that's a huge number. You know, I think the other two was budget, and I can't remember the other one, but it was interesting to see those numbers coming out, because this is something that's really important to kids. And so, you know, it's kind of as important as like DEIJ. And so you want to bring that diversity, inclusion, justice, environment in. And I think that it won't be too long before that actually is the norm, I hope. But at the same time, I think it's about inviting students and teachers into the design of the curriculum, looking at, again, what the school's interested in. If they're a big sports school, how they can turn that into some sort of interest or meaning or impact that they can have. And again, I think it's really about just sort of helping students find their voice and their path and how that relates to the school.
Darcy.
Go ahead, Darcy.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'll probably just repeat on a couple of things I said. I think the lens aspect is really useful. And again, the confidence and competence of teachers and just working with them so that they feel a sense of ownership and connection to things like global citizenship without it being too prescriptive, but I suppose scaffolded enough so that they have some connection, but then some autonomy for them to explore on their own thing. So I'm not a big fan of giving definitions or, you know, here's the global goals, include them in your lesson. It's a bit of an evolution for people to come from wherever they're at on their spectrum to feeling comfortable to be able to include these perspectives into their class. But this is where I think modeling some of those examples becomes very useful. So, you know, hey, here's an example in that PE class looking at basketball uniforms, or the music class and the violin that's under your chin. Where did those strings come from? You know, in your bow, that sort of thing. And eventually, I think over time, with some decent vocabulary, a bit of modeling, maybe some formality in the curriculum, like, okay, where can we add in the global goals? What are our touching points in this unit of work? A little bit of deliberate stuff, a little bit of professional learning. I think just some good stimuli, like Megan said, like, here's a report to read. You just build that culture around it, so people slowly but surely have a closer connection to these topics and issues, and can start feeding them into their own personal lives and also into the school life around them.
Mine will be kind of a little bit more of a boring approach, but you know, one thing I know school leaders are fantastic, and they should give themselves credit, is taking a new initiative or something that's really important and building it into the school. They're fantastic at action planning and putting people in the right place and applying the right levers. So all I would suggest is, you would never fix a problem with literacy. You know, we've identified a gap in year 10 literacy. Let's buy 10 books and put them in the library. They would never do that, right? They would think about how they'd make the change, how they resource it, where they put their time, what they do with the curriculum. It would be a years-long process. So I guess I would say, okay, take out literacy and put in sustainability. Who are you going to apply to this to make a difference? Where are you going to put the time? What resources are you going to need? So the same structures that a school uses to improve literacy, it's exactly the same as I would suggest to use for sustainability. Just change the word. And if you need an expert in literacy, you'd go and find one. If you need an expert in sustainability, you'd train one up, or you'd go and find one. So curriculum is really, really busy already. We all know it's super full. So one good thing has to displace one other good thing. So it's a definitive decision from a leader to say, this is so important to me that I'm going to find a way to fit it in. I'm going to apply the same levers that I would apply to change for anything. I'm just putting sustainability. And leaders are fantastic at doing that in schools. We know they are, because that's how they drive change.
I sort of wonder about the element of actually one thing in, one thing out, because we've talked a lot about how this can infiltrate every subject. So when we were designing our curriculum, it was, you know, there's the science element of it, but it's mostly about intersectionality. It's about how we process news and information and deciphering whether or not it's real. It's talking about activism and Indigenous wisdom. So actually, those are all the things that need to be touched on in different subjects. So it's not necessarily pushing anything else out. And I think it's sort of dispelling that myth for teachers that they're going to have to kind of cram something in for something else to come out, because I think that's where it feels the teachers feel that extra pressure of already a difficult subject. Now I've got to bring it in and hold the space. And so I think that's one thing. I think also just talking about how you get children to sort of have that longevity and have that lifelong passion for sustainability. Again, I think it's about for maybe it's just the psychologist in me, but that middle well-being part of it, not just being about this is the information, this is the action, but actually building that resilience, building that ability to find what they're passionate about, what they care about. And they'll find that if the curriculum is broad enough, because it might be math, it might be geometry, it might be poetry, whatever it is. But if you open up that whole space in a grand curriculum, every child that comes out of that is going to feel more resilient, more self-efficacy, and more empowered to go and take climate action.
Yeah, we don't argue often, but I'm going to argue a little bit only because I think it's important that we don't all just agree all the time. But if I pick out the British national curriculum as a specific example, climate education features like that. And if we want children of a certain age to learn about it, we're going to have to find a way to put it in, as well as thread it through. And I guess that's my point. I 100% think we can touch on it everywhere, in the systems thinking, in the approaches. Everything you're saying, Megan, can be done in geography as much as it can be done in music. But we also should be advocating for changes to national curriculum where they don't feature sustainability or climate change. But I mean, climate change itself is one of 9 planetary boundaries. So it's a major issue now, but it's not alone. So
and I think it is that shift. Yeah, I mean, they've already, so the national curriculum here is just brought in the GCSE course that you can do on sustainability, so it is coming in, but again, it's specific subjects. And I think we've all agreed it's across the board sort of mandatory thing that should happen.
Yeah, a term I like to use is curriculum agnostic, where we can kind of do some of these things regardless of what curriculum. I mean, I had to write a lot of curriculum 10 years ago, and I didn't like it particularly because they don't last very long, and they shouldn't. Like, they should evolve, etc. So yeah, Brett, I agree. Like, some touch points in the curriculum is really important because it grounds those sorts of things. But then also giving some tools where people can add in. I kind of call it a value add rather than just an add in and enhance whatever people are already doing. But it does require some hand holding and just some really simple examples, and for people to feel the power of what they're doing. We're lucky as educators that we do get to put our fingerprint in the future of the world by being educators and also people who are involved in our schools. If you're working in the school canteen and chopping up the onion for that day, you're a part of that child's nutrition and for them to have a great learning environment. And so if we can kind of holistically look at this from time to time and realize what we're doing is significant, we don't want to overblow it too much, but we do have a really great opportunity to bring these conversations in and these little touching points where they're appropriate and try and push for more of them.
Yeah, and that sort of moves onto our last question for the discussion here, is looking at some initial strategies and practical initiatives that schools can start to do. If obviously we've agreed that most leaders around the world and educators are passionate about the environment and how their school impacts the environment around them. What are some initial strategies that you might advise where they could start? Perhaps they're quite far behind in that journey and they want to start somewhere, or perhaps they're in the middle of the journey and they want to sort of kickstart it even further. Any ideas? Any sort of final tips and thoughts that you might advise for them?
I think educators they love doing, right? So we are always willing to do. So I think first is to decide that there's a mind shift change that has to happen if we really want implicit change. I think that's really important, and that's going to come from education for sustainability. And like Megan said, is approaching everything at the same time. It's mindset, it's well-being, it's an understanding of sustainability as a big global thing as opposed to just a subject. So if we accept that that's the main endpoint, at the same time we're going to start doing, because we can't wait, My first thing would be to find out what you don't know. So audit something. So there's loads of frameworks you could use that are free. You could pay a company, you get the kids involved, and then they're educating for sustainability. So the first thing would be start with finding out what you don't know. Once you've got something in your hand, then you can get started.
I would say for educators, it's important to hold the space for yourself as well emotionally, of bringing in this new curriculum, how it's going to affect your students, and making sure that you have your own self-care plans, that you have your own network of support, who you can talk to, who you can share best practice with, troubleshoot with. So actually feeling that you're in a space where you're confident in being able to teach this from sort of your own well-being as well.
Yeah, and a place I like to start is vocabulary, and looking at a couple of key terms and trying to work out what the hell they mean. Like, what is sustainability? And global citizenship is a really difficult term for most people to get their head around. They either think it's, do I need to speak different languages or travel around the world? And so one of the opening questions that I start with is, are you a global citizen? And to answer that, you have to have a personal connection to what the hell global citizenship means to you. And that's great. So I think for me, it's a starting point. And that answer could be, well, I don't know if I'm a global citizen, because what does that actually mean? And so I think starting with some of those key conversations has been useful. And then, as Brett was saying, a couple of questions to follow on from that. What's important to us? What are we doing well? What more and could and should we be doing in that space? And then just exploring those concepts and ideas and finding the little gaps where we can add in some either professional learning or opportunities or connections or perspectives or provocations. Just starting very simple with those sorts of things, but they really go a long way. Once you just start having a couple of key conversations, I think things start to flow quite quickly, from what I've seen in recent experience, for sure.
And just sort of sitting on that a second, have you found that sort of getting a couple of teachers that are super passionate about this on board, and then them running their own little sessions for their colleagues, is that something you guys have seen and tried in your schools as well? Sort of getting those one or two early adopters that are just hyper passionate about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, having that energy somewhere, someone's a champion for it, it always brings people along. So there's no doubt they're good, as long as we don't burn those people out, right? We need to not rely on them. They need to share the energy so that it becomes institutional, and as Megan said, collective change is the power here, the network.
So sometimes it's also the dissenters, to listen to what are the apprehensions or the challenges or the barriers to entry with some of these things. I mean, I feel confident in that sense because I've been talking about this stuff for a long time. So you'd want to feel comfortable with doing that. But yeah, sometimes it is worth opening up the room and just saying, well, what are our challenges, or what are our barriers to entry here, or progression, and just taking them on and seeing where we go. Fantastic.
Brilliant stuff. Well, thank you so much, guys. That's been a really, really great conversation. Such a massive pertinent topic, but there's so many areas I'm sure we could dig into a part 2 or even maybe a part 3 discussion. But yeah, thank you so much for this initial chat, and looking forward to getting feedback from listeners from the ISN community and further afield as well. Thanks again.